What did your parents teach you that you had to unlearn? My mum told me you couldn't wear tampons until you've had a baby. Tampons were a revelation for me when I learned all the cool girls at school used them. That in the real world, people don't have extreme and violent fights over minimal things, and then act like nothing happened once it's over. Also, throwing tantrums are not the appropriate way to handle problems. Poor credit financial decision making. Had to learn some of that the hard way and correct them. And you don't realize that your childhood lifestyle was a financial sham until you're already spiraling down that same drain as a young member of the workforce. My mother always said I didn't need education. I just needed to marry a rich man. Lol, my dad tells me I need to marry a rich woman, in addition to majoring in chemical engineering. Being passive aggressive. My mum is the worst at that, and I used to follow in her steps, until a friend told me I was doing it. Now I am trying to retrain my mum. It does not work. I go to visit my parents, and let's say my mum wants me to help her out doing something. If she doesn't ask clearly, I won't help. Because if I do she will be like Nuaru, don't worry I can do it. But if I don't she will be heavily citing. Walking all around the place like she is busy and has so much work to do. Looking at me meanly, I would be like, do you need help? She would just answer, no I'm fine. Well if you're fine that's fine for me too. I hate when she does that. How hard is it just to ask? She wants my sisters, my dad and me just to guess what she wants. And we are so used to it that we just know. But I'm not acting on it anymore. I see my sisters being peed off at me but not saying anything. They're as much passive aggressive as my mum. Of course I'll have a mail later, or when we're talking on the phone a few days later, she will hint that she's angry at me. But it's over. I have decided that if they want anything, they can ask. If I need anything, that's what I do now. It's so much easier as well. I never feel angry at people for stupid things anymore. Of course people aren't mind readers. That you have to adore your parents because they birthed you and raised you, regardless of whether they actually did anything to earn your admiration or trust. My parents brought me up to believe that bullies were all people of low intelligence who would never really get far in life. This led me to believe that if I just bided my time I would never have to deal with them again, and I didn't really develop much defensive behavior. They could not have been more wrong. To finish my plate go back for seconds. Learning to quit before I'm full, stuffed, has done predictably wonderful things to my waistline. When I'm back at their home for a meal, mom always pushes me to go back for more. Same here. My mom overserved our food way too much. Huge plates of rice every day for dinner. She wouldn't let us leave until we finished. Really gives you horrible eating habits. Oh, and growing up fat. My parents paid bills based on the cutoff date rather than the due date. They also acted like a good credit score was not a big deal. They drove theirs into the ground and then started putting things in my name. Took years, but now I pay my bills before spending anything on unnecessary things and have paid off all the delinquent bills they left on my credit. I am now teaching my 6-year-old to manage her own money by not spending all she has, but saving a bit too. The other day she had $10 from saving up her allowances for a while, and when she went shopping, she spent only $6 because she said she wanted to save the rest. I dang near cried. I had to stop calling pantries food closets. BRB, getting a screw spinner out of my tool bucket in the car hole. That marriages had to be miserable. Wasn't until I started going to sleep over at a friend's house and I saw his parents actually laughing and having a good time together that I learned that marriage can actually be good. I felt the same way when I got into my first serious relationship and spent more time over at his house. It blew my mind to realize that married people in their 50s actually spent time together and enjoyed each other's company, instead of retreating to their separate corners of the house after dinner. That wanting things is selfish. My grandmother raised me, and now that I'm older she started to keep telling me this. I'm selfish for buying things I can afford with money I made, just because it doesn't match her list of things she considers a priority. Wanting can be selfish, but it isn't always selfish. JFC. That you can't ride around everywhere with a cooler full of beer or liquor and use your kids as the backseat bartenders while you drive. For now, we're about 5-10 years from rolling parties. communicating my feelings and how to properly express them. My family has some horrible communication skills, and it's not something I realized until my husband pointed it out to me when we first started dating. We had a tendency to explode, then completely shut down and not speak to each other if we ever got into an argument. Sometimes we would say the meanest possible thing just to hurt the other person. Occasionally, the arguments would turn violent, but that was usually between my sister and I. My parents never turned violent. Admitting that we were wrong about something was also difficult for us. Also, mind reading. If something was upsetting us, we would never express it and just left it to the other person to guess what was wrong. My husband thought it was crazy how we communicated with each other, and again, I didn't realize it until he pointed it out. It took years and I honestly still struggle with it, but have a much easier time analyzing a situation and expressing my feelings in a calm manner. That you will die if you leave the fan on at night. My mom is a very shy, non-social, passive person who has always had terrible self-esteem. She prides herself on not having needs and being the person who is okay with anything no matter what. Of course, none of this is actually true. She merely doesn't directly ask for her needs. You find out what her needs were over a long period of passive-aggressive behavior. When I was growing up, she wanted to instill in me the idea that I would always let others' needs go ahead of my own and that I shouldn't stand out ever, always fading into the background so I don't get in the important people's way. She'd often say, off the cuff, "You wouldn't want anyone noticing you. You wouldn't want to get in someone else's way. Murder Kitty doesn't need anything. Or you don't want to be a bother." She believed she was instilling wisdom by telling me that all clothes I wear, I'm a woman, should be neutral colors, too big, and nothing that would make anybody notice me. Nothing could be exposed above the elbows or knees, or below the clavicle, or I would get nasty comments from her. Looking back as an adult, I recognize that she was probably trying to protect me, but it really fricked me up well into my 20s. I didn't wear a single article of clothing that was flattering, fun, or fashionable until I was 23. Besides the clothes thing, this resulted in having terrible self-esteem throughout my teen years and early 20s, especially about my body, dating, allowing myself to spend money on frivolous things once in a while, and most importantly, learning to take up space in the world. It's a good thing to directly state your needs, to say I don't want that, to stop caring what others think about you and how in the way you supposedly are, and to put yourself first most of the time. I now realize that the people who are passively putting others first are very mentally and sometimes physically unhealthy people who are, ironically, creating a bigger burden on people by not caring for themselves. That you always have to clean your plate at a meal, and just because someone asks you are you sure that's enough food, that doesn't mean you should get more food. I am still unlearning these things. Yes, parents always had the finish your food rule instead of eating what we actually needed or was hungry for. I think they thought it was teaching us to not be wasteful, but instead it instilled bad eating habits. Practice makes perfect. Practice makes permanent. Practicing doesn't help if you don't know how to do the nebulous it correctly. As my karate teacher used to say, wrong practice makes wrong perfect. Knuckle cracking does not in fact cause arthritis, or have any detrimental health effects at all. Despite extensive medical documentation confirming this, my mother still refuses to believe it and gives anyone that does it around her an earful. In a darker sense, the domestic violence is unacceptable. My Mexican grandmother and to an extent, my own parents, taught me that screaming fights, throwing things, hands to the face, and shove slaps and such were normal, but they were okay because we lived in a culture where women are allowed to fight back with their men. Just had to be sure to get him good. The older I've gotten and the more I've steered away from dating men of my former social class, the more I've learned about how unacceptable and incredibly fricked up that kind of mentality really is. That you need to cook poultry until it's dry as crap. I make the turkey every Thanksgiving these days. Not to speak out when people are being treated unfairly. Turns out that there are people who don't wonder what is wrong with me for doing my own thing as long as I'm not rude to them. It's perfectly fine to go watch a movie without my sister. I'm still waiting for that moment when owning Pokemon Black will ruin my future. Yet, I can wear my short-sleeved House Stark of Winterfell t-shirts. I can even wear them in the winter as long as I have something else over them to keep warm. If you have a fever, it is perfectly fine to wait a few days until you feel better before cleaning your whole living space. Also, if you're coughing every few steps, not wanting to spend an hour walking to a shop for stuff you don't need and back does not mean you're lazy. No, chicken is not supposed to be burned outside and raw inside. Salt is not the only thing to put on food. Dad can cook. He doesn't burn the chicken. When I started taking cooking classes and we got creative in the kitchen, it turned out that he is good at it. No one is entitled to your time. If someone wants to hang out and you don't want to, you are allowed to have other plans. Those plans can include pizza and a movie. You can have a previous engagement with the couch. Dad taught me how to order at restaurants. I get my date's order and give the waiter both. If there's a question, like does my date want salad or soup, the waiter is supposed to ask me and I ask her and then she tells me and I tell the waiter. I was taught this was the way it's done, like not putting your elbows on the table. Surprisingly, I did okay for a long time. But obviously, this style of ordering came from a time where women were closer to property. My so has her own interactions with the wait staff. I no longer am the go-between. My mom still gets upset when I don't order for her at a restaurant. I've never done it for any of my partners. It's a foreign, rude concept to me. That I don't need to obsessively conserve everything. We weren't poor when I was growing up, but we had a pretty tight budget and not a lot of extra money for anything. My dad would pour water into the chocolate syrup to make it last longer. Same with soap. I always felt bad about finishing something, like a package of crackers or a jar of peanut butter. This has persisted into my life now. My parents collectively make a lot more money, plus I have my own part-time job. I still find myself not using enough shampoo in the shower because I don't want to use it up too quickly. Or, when I get my monthly Sephora Play box, those samples last forever because I feel bad finishing them, even though that's literally what they're for. I have a really hard time throwing anything away that I can think of any kind of use for, even if I know I'm not going to use it. It's a struggle. A happy medium. There isn't such a bad thing really. Most people are really wasteful. Being mindful is good, just not to the point you are stressing about it. That adults, or people older than I am, will always be smarter than me. Farthest thing from the truth. Heck, I'm not even as smart as I used to be. I used to know everything. If you're going to do something, be the best there is at that thing or it's not worth doing. Play in the band, be first chair, join a team, win the game, be the captain, score a goal. An A is practically a B, and a B is might as well be failing. It's led to a life of success, respect, stress, fear of failure, inadequacy and depression. There isn't much I can do purely because I enjoy it, and even those things leave me feeling guilty and shameful that I wasn't doing something more important. So I haven't quite unlearned it yet, but I'm working on it. My mother taught me how to be a lying, manipulative, narcissistic prick. I'm only just now realizing this, and it only manifests with romantic partners. I'm working on unlearning this now. That you should respect your elders. If you're dong, you're dong. Growing up, people in my family talked up my dad as a good driver, and I believed them. My grandfather, on my mother's side, was his biggest advocate, and my dad always vouched for his driving as well. So I internalized that and that became my idea of a good driver. A few years ago my grandfather and dad drove a family friend around, and that was when I learned that they're both overly aggressive, impatient, and risk-taking drivers. Now that it's been pointed out to me, I always notice all the tailgating, lack of signaling, and questionable lane changing. Like a good chunk of people, mild racism. Also, that you can undercook steak and it's freaking delicious. I like my racism like I like my steak, rare. How to be in a horrible relationship, as in father who didn't want to be there, mother who put up with it for years. Can't tell you how many years I wasted recreating that nonsense until one day I said, my god, this is a relationship my parents had. Still wrestle with it, to be honest, but at least now I'm aware. My father wasn't a very good man, but he tried to be a good father. He taught us that nothing is more important than family and that you should give your life for your family if needed. He taught us that loyalty was more important than feeling loved or valued. There's good threads of intention in those lessons, but it really fricked up my family dynamic for a long time. He taught us that if your pain is bad, you shouldn't confront it, but you should drink and suppress it until it comes out in bursts of violence. This one was hard for me to unlearn, and I'm still working on it. It's even harder for my brother. That I'm a disappointment. It took well over a decade after moving out to unlearn that one. I'm on the verge of moving out and I'm fairly certain I'll be in the same boat you were. Your grades are the only thing that matters. For my whole life I was taught this, and for the most part, until the end of high school, I was able to get good grades effortlessly. I did quite well on standardized tests and got away with blowing off a lot of homework for school. My parents weren't happy with this because if you put in more effort you could get straight A's. My dad called my 33 ACT score pathetic, so it was pretty much ingrained in my brain that I wasn't good enough. A bunch of my cousins were great students that ended up going to prestigious colleges, Ivy League and such, so I was always compared to them and treated like a failure. Once I myself got to college I couldn't handle it and ended up failing out. After that happened I was dangerously close to being suicidal for a while. If I have terrible grades then I might as well be nothing, right? I ended up getting a job where I've been moving up pretty fast. Every time I talk to my parents they keep telling me that I won't amount to anything without a degree, but I make about as much right now as my friends who recently graduated. I know they aren't 100% wrong, but they definitely aren't 100% right. My parents always taught me to be polite, but nowadays people always tell me that I'm too polite to the point that it seems fake. My mom always told me to be nice and talkative to everyone. This totally backfired and I ended up being fricked over by a lot of friends I had as a kid. But luckily this helped me learn who my real friends were. I still treat everyone with respect, but my previous experiences have led me to become much more reserved and cautious about who I make friends with. It's also led me to become extremely introverted. That I am nothing more than an annoyance and inconvenience, and that I can trust no one, and that no one will ever love me. Not really, not selflessly. I still have serious self-esteem issues about it and a lot of other stuff that happened, but I have my own family now that actually does love me and care for me, without ulterior motives involved. I can trust people. Oh, and a whole host of obsessive behaviors about food and weight gain, and what a healthy portion size is. And I have a very, very hard time with quiet environments. It took a lot of soul searching on my part to realize that getting a degree from a prestigious university and getting a ridiculously high paying job is not the only path to happiness, and that I'm allowed to make happiness my number one priority. I was raised to believe that I would be a complete failure if I didn't go to university right after high school and make as much money as possible. Taking a gap year was not an option. Going to trade school was not an option. Money came before happiness because money would lead to happiness. I ended up dropping out. My family disowned me. I beat myself up, thinking I'd never amount to anything. I fought through the worst depression I'd ever experienced and worked many short-lived jobs over the course of 5 years, until, by pure coincidence, I stumbled upon my true calling in life. I took what was supposed to be a temporary job at my local animal shelter. Within the first week I knew it was what I was meant to do. I've worked there for 2 years now. I come home covered in puke, poop, and blood every day. I cry for those animals almost every day. I only make $8 an hour, but I would do my job for free, and I absolutely love every second of it. I might struggle financially at times, but I'm happy, and that's all that matters. Like this video and this good bee will play you a nice song. If you are new to the channel, you can subscribe. I publish new videos every day. Until then, check another video, or don't. Either way, have a great day you magnificent people.